All right, so have you ever thought about what it would be like to be, like, discriminated against
Yeah, I mean,
just because of your religion?
yeah.
Like trying to rent an apartment or get a
Yeah,
job
yeah.
and facing, like, roadblocks just because of your faith.
Aw,
I mean, it's pretty messed up, right?
yeah.
So today, we are going on a deep dive into this concept of secularism,
Yeah.
especially in the context of, like, India,
Yeah.
with its incredible diversity of religions.
Right.
It's a pretty fascinating case study, to see how they try to ensure everyone's right to believe and practice their faith freely. So,
Well, I think the first thing to really grapple with is why secularism even matters in the first place. What's the big deal about separating religion and state power?
yeah, I mean, is it really that important?
Well, think about it. Throughout history, we've seen countless examples of what happens when religion gets entangled with politics and those in power. Like, the most horrific example that comes to mind is Nazi Germany. The persecution of Jews was fueled by, this twisted ideology that targeted an entire group based solely on their religion.
Right, right.
And even today, we see instances where certain groups face discrimination or persecution because of their faith, like minorities in some Middle Eastern countries.
So you're saying that secularism is like this safeguard against that kind of thing happening?
Exactly. That's where India's approach gets really interesting, because they've enshrined this idea in their constitution. It guarantees freedom of religion to every citizen.
Oh, okay. So that's what that means.
And it aims to prevent what they call the tyranny of the majority.
Okay, tyranny of the majority.
Yeah.
What's that?
So imagine, right, you have a country where the majority religious group uses their political power
Okay.
to impose their beliefs and practices on everyone else.
Mm.
Minorities, then, they face discrimination, their rights might be curtailed, and their freedom to practice their own religion would be threatened.
Oh, I see. So it's like this shield that protects, everyone's right to believe and practice their faith freely, whether they're like part of the majority or not.
Exactly. It ensures that the government doesn't play favorites,
Right.
It doesn't favor one religion over another. It protects individuals. It gives them the right to choose, the right to practice, even change their religion without fear of persecution or coercion.
So, like, if someone wants to convert from one religion to another, the state can't, like, interfere.
That's right. They can't interfere. They can't punish them for that decision.
Mm-hmm.
They can't force anyone to follow a particular religion or prevent them from practicing their chosen faith.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of something we were talking about earlier, that even within the same religion, there can be, like, so many different interpretations and practices, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's another crucial aspect of Indian secularism. It recognizes that the potential for oppression and discrimination isn't limited to, clashes between different religions.
Mm-hmm.
It can also arise within a religious community itself.
Oh, okay. So, like, what kind of example are we talking about here?
Well, let's consider, the practice of untouchability within Hinduism.
Right.
For centuries, Dalits, who were considered untouchables, faced severe discrimination and social exclusion based on their caste, even though this practice is rooted in Hinduism.
That's a pretty stark example of how even within a single religion, you can have these, like, power dynamics.
Absolutely.
And hierarchies that lead to oppression.
Right. Absolutely. And this is where the Indian Constitution takes a unique approach.
Okay.
It doesn't just advocate for a separation of religion and state. It also grants the state the power to intervene in religious matters if it's necessary to prevent discrimination.
Hold on. So the Indian government can actually, like, step in and challenge certain religious practices.
Precisely. It's not about dictating religious beliefs, right? It's about ensuring that no one is subjected to discrimination or denied their fundamental rights in the name of religion.
So, like, in the case of untouchability, the Indian state intervened by outlawing this practice altogether.
Exactly.
Even though it was, deeply rooted in Hindu tradition.
Exactly. The Constitution recognizes that the right to equality and dignity for all individuals supersedes any religious practice that undermines those fundamental principles.
Yeah.
It's about creating a society where everyone has equal opportunities and is treated with respect, regardless of their caste, creed, or religious beliefs.
So Indian secularism isn't just about, like, building a wall between religion and state, right?
Right.
It's about actively protecting individuals from any form of religious domination.
Yeah.
Whether it's from, another religion or even from within their own faith.
You got it. It's a proactive approach,
Yeah.
ensuring that religion doesn't become a tool for oppression or discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
but rather a source of individual and societal harmony.
Okay, so I'm starting to get a clearer picture of how Indian secularism works. But before we move on, can we just recap the key points we've covered so far? I just want to make sure I'm following.
Absolutely. So we've established that Indian secularism has three main objectives.
Okay,
First, preventing domination by one religious community over another.
got it.
This means ensuring that no single religious group can use state power to impose their beliefs on others
Mm-hmm.
or discriminate against those with different faiths. Second, preventing domination within the same religious community. So this focuses on addressing issues like untouchability, where discrimination and oppression occur within a religious group
Right.
based on factors like caste or sect. And finally, ensuring the state doesn't enforce any particular religion or take away individual religious freedom. This guarantees that individuals have the freedom to choose, practice, and even change their religion without interference or coercion from the state.
So it's like a three-pronged approach to creating a society where religion is a matter of individual choice, right?
Yeah.
And doesn't infringe on anyone's rights or freedoms.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this is a dynamic and evolving process, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There are always challenges and debates about how to best uphold these principles
Right.
in a diverse and complex society like India.
This is all incredibly fascinating. I'm already seeing secularism in a whole new light. But before we get into those challenges and debates,
Yeah.
I think it's time for a little break.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll be back soon to explore more about how these principles play out in everyday life in India. Stay tuned.
All right. So, welcome back to our deep dive.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into some actual examples of how these principles we've been talking about,
Right.
actually play out in Indian society.
Uh-huh.
Because it's one thing to talk about ideals, but seeing them in action is what really brings it to life, right?
You're absolutely right. And I think a good area to look at is education.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Education, yeah.
It's so crucial, right? When you think about shaping young minds and fostering a sense of unity
Right.
and understanding between different religious communities.
Because schools are where, kids from all backgrounds come together. So
Yeah.
how does India ensure that education doesn't become, a breeding ground for religious tensions?
Right. Well, remember that principle of distancing we talked about? It plays a key role in Indian schools, especially government-run schools.
Okay.
It means that the school, as an institution, can't endorse or promote any one religion.
So no, religious assemblies or prayers in government schools.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So imagine a group of students wants to celebrate, I don't know, Diwali in a government school.
Right.
The school itself can't officially endorse the celebration, right?
Right.
Or participate in any religious activities.
Okay.
They have to maintain this neutral stance.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Because, otherwise it wouldn't be fair to students of other faiths
Exactly.
who might, feel excluded or pressured. Exactly, yeah. But it's not about preventing students from practicing their religion altogether.
Right. Yeah.
They're free to celebrate, their festivals, observe their religious practices, but outside of school,
Yeah, okay.
with their families and communities.
So it's about drawing a line, right?
Exactly.
Between personal religious practice and the official activities of a state-run institution.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I get it.
It's like saying, you can express your faith, but the school as a public space
Right.
needs to remain neutral,
Right.
inclusive for everybody.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Are there any situations where this distancing principle gets a bit trickier?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Think about Sikh students who wear turbans
Oh, right.
as a religious observance.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah.
That was an example of the non-interference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Indian law actually recognizes the turban's importance, right?
Yeah.
And even exempts Sikh motorcyclists from helmet laws.
Right. Which is really interesting.
So how does that translate to the school environment?
So let's say a school, they have this uniform policy that requires all students to wear a particular type of headwear.
Right.
In this case, the principle of non-interference would likely mean making an exception for Sikh students
Okay.
who wear turbans.
So it's even though there's a general rule, the state recognizes the need to accommodate
Exactly.
religious practices in certain situations.
It's about, like, finding a balance
right.
between upholding those general principles and respecting individual religious freedom.
Right.
And this balancing act, it gets even more complicated when we start talking about intervention.
Right. Intervention, that's where the state can actually like step in and challenge certain practices.
Exactly. And a good example of this is in the area of personal laws.
Okay.
So in India, different religious communities have their own sets of personal laws
that govern things like marriage, divorce, inheritance, adoption.
Oh, so that's what personal laws are.
Yeah.
I've heard that term before, but I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, so they're essentially, like a separate set of laws based on religious interpretations that apply to like specific communities. Now, the problem is sometimes these personal laws might contain provisions that discriminate against certain groups, particularly women.
So how does like the intervention principle come into play here?
Well, if any part of a personal law is deemed to like violate the fundamental rights or the principles of equality, guaranteed by the Indian Constitution, the state can step in and modify or even overturn those provisions.
So even though these laws are like rooted in religious beliefs, they're not above the law of the land.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the Indian Constitution acts as a like safeguard, ensuring that everyone is protected from discrimination.
That's precisely it.
Okay.
The Constitution upholds the right to religious freedom, but it also ensures that that freedom doesn't come at the cost of someone else's fundamental rights.
That seems like a pretty delicate like balance to strike.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So balancing religious freedom with like individual rights and social justice, that must lead to some pretty like heated debates, right?
You're absolutely right. And a really good example of this is the debate surrounding the practice of triple talaq in Islam. For years, Muslim women in India fought for their rights, arguing that this practice, which allowed men to divorce their wives just by saying talaq 3 times, was, discriminatory and unjust.
Yeah, that does sound incredibly like unfair and one-sided.
Oh, absolutely. So how did this, play out in terms of the state's intervention power? Well, after years of activism and, legal battles, the Indian government in 2019 passed a law criminalizing triple talaq.
Wow.
This was a huge deal, like a landmark moment, because it demonstrated the state's willingness to intervene in a matter of personal law to protect the rights and dignity of women.
That's a powerful example of how the intervention principle can be used to address like deeply entrenched practices.
Absolutely.
And, ensure that everyone is treated equally under the law, regardless of their religion.
Exactly. But it's also important to acknowledge that like such interventions are often highly sensitive. They spark, intense debates. There are always concerns about striking the right balance, between respecting religious freedom and upholding individual rights.
It's like navigating a minefield, right?
Yes.
Of like religious sensitivities and deeply held beliefs.
Exactly, yeah. Too much intervention can be seen as an infringement on religious freedom, while too little can perpetuate discrimination and injustice. So it's this ongoing process of finding that, delicate equilibrium.
So it sounds like Indian secularism is this like really dynamic and constantly evolving concept.
Absolutely.
It's not like a static set of rules.
It's not fixed, no.
But rather a continuous process of like reflection and debate and adaptation, trying to create a society that's both like diverse and just.
Exactly, yeah.
This is all so insightful. We've gone from like understanding those core principles of Indian secularism to actually seeing how they play out. In like specific areas like education and personal law. It's really fascinating to see like how this concept is actually being put into practice with all of its complexities and challenges.
It's a testament to India's commitment to creating a society where everyone can live with dignity and respect regardless of their faith. And while there are certainly challenges along the way, the ongoing dialogue and those efforts to uphold these principles are really what make Indian secularism such a vibrant and essential aspect of their democracy.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And I'm like really eager to hear your, final thoughts on all of this.
Right.
But before we wrap up, I think we should like take a moment to just like gather our thoughts and prepare for the final part.
Okay, yeah.
For our deep dive.
That sounds good. We've, really delved into, like, the intricacies of Indian secularism and its unique approach.
Yeah.
So taking a pause before we kind of reflect on its broader implications seems like a perfect, transition to our final segment.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
So we'll be back shortly to wrap up our exploration of secularism in India. Stay tuned.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. So we're back.
Back for our final segment.
It's been a really fascinating journey exploring secularism in India.
Yeah, absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
Yeah, we've gone from the core principles to actual examples,
Right. How it works in education, those personal laws.
And even those tricky debates and challenges it faces.
Yeah. It's a complex issue for sure.
It is. I think what's really stood out to me is how India's approach, it's not just about separation.
Yeah, right.
It's about actually protecting individual rights and preventing any form of religious domination, whether it comes from another religion or even within their own faith, right?
Yeah, it's about both freedom of religion and freedom from religion.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it.
Ensuring that everyone, feels safe and respected regardless of what they believe or even if they don't believe.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
But, we've talked about these safeguards in the Constitution and the state's commitment to these principles.
Right.
But, violations still happen.
They do, yeah.
So how does India actually deal with those instances where those secular ideals clash with what's happening in reality?
Yeah, that's a really important question. It shows us that secularism isn't just a bunch of laws or principles on paper, It's this ongoing process.
Yeah.
It needs constant vigilance, dialogue, and a real commitment from everyone to actually uphold these values.
So it's about creating a whole culture of respect, right?
Exactly.
And understanding where everyone feels valued and has that freedom to practice their faith without fear of, discrimination.
Absolutely. And that's where education comes in, public discourse, promoting interfaith harmony.
Yeah.
It's about creating an environment where people from different backgrounds,
Right.
they can come together, learn from each other, and celebrate that shared humanity.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That idea of celebrating what we share, you know?
Absolutely.
It reminds me, we've been focusing a lot on the potential for conflict and preventing domination. But aren't there also a lot of examples of cooperation and solidarity in India?
Oh, tons. Countless examples. I mean, India's history is full of instances where communities have come together to support each other, celebrate each other's festivals, working towards common goals.
Yeah. Can you give us some specific examples? I'm sure our listeners would be so interested.
Of course. Think about all the festivals that are celebrated across India, right? Diwali, Holi, Eid, Christmas. People from different religions, they participate, they enjoy each other's traditions.
Yeah.
These celebrations, they often go beyond just religion.
Right.
They become occasions for shared joy and communal harmony.
It's so nice to see those images,
It is.
People from all walks of life coming together, regardless of their faith. It gives me hope,
It is a powerful reminder, yeah, that even though we have our differences, we all share this common humanity.
Yeah.
And there's a deep well of compassion and empathy that can, bridge those divides.
This has been such an insightful deep dive,
It has, yeah.
exploring all the complexities of secularism in India. It's not perfect. There are definitely challenges.
Yeah.
But it's a testament to India's commitment to creating a truly inclusive and diverse society.
Well said. And I think it's key to remember that secularism in any form is an ongoing process. It needs constant reflection, dialogue, and, a willingness to adapt as society changes.
As we wrap up, I just want to leave our listeners with one thought. We've talked about the laws, the principles, the challenges, those inspiring stories. But secularism, it's about each of us.
That's right.
It's about how we treat each other, how we respect differences, and how we work together to build a more just world.
Beautifully put. Secularism is not just an abstract concept.
Right.
It's a lived experience, a choice we make every day to embrace diversity, promote understanding, and stand up for the rights of all individuals.
So to our listener, keep exploring these ideas, engage in thoughtful conversations, and most importantly, be a part of shaping a society where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep those minds curious and keep those hearts open.